Hello and welcome, Exile. So the conclusion to the life stacking project, how far could we stack the life number? Well, when it comes to making a character that is good and can do damage and it can play the game, that number is about 53,000. Now this character isn't perfectly optimized. I could have made gear better in a few places. For example, I could have T1% life on the synthesis implicit. I could have the T1 flat strength instead of all attributes. There are things we can improve. There are things that would cost a lot to improve. And I gotta be honest, I got burnt out on wanting to farm money. I just want to, I want to close this door on the project. I want to finish it up. And so I didn't get it perfect. I think if I got it perfect for a practical use case, it would be somewhere in the range of 55 to 60,000 life at the very top end. Maybe you could push a little bit into the low 60s in terms of a practical character that is going to be pretty strong using something like a Wrathpith. Wrathpith being the reason the build is strong because it gives you so much percent damage. It capture crit all in one item. It's hard to pass this item up. Now, as for making the character impractical and pushing the number up, later in the video, I'm going to cut to a setup where I have basically no interest in damage scaling. I unsocket all my gems. I put on Untouched Soul just to see how high we can get the life number to go. That will be later. But for right now, I want to showcase this version of the build and just give you a little bit of the highlights. Now, highlight number one when it comes to life stacking, it's all due to this new Ascendancy called Crimson Power from the Warlock Ascendancy. This thing right here says we are going to make, instead of giving you 12 flat life per level, we're going to give you 6. So it takes away some of your base life scaling. And then it says, in return, all the ES on your armor pieces, that's your body armor, your helmet, your shield, your boots, and your gloves, is going to be converted into flat life. That is why we can push a new maximum for life scaling. For my character, I have a lot of ES on my gear pieces. You'll notice I have a lot of ES, and I also have life on my pieces as well. But from these pieces, I'm getting about 2,000 flat ES, which is converted into flat life. Overall, because we're losing 6 life per level from this thing, overall, it's about a net 1,400 flat life from this one point. So that right there means a lot of life. For example, if I unspec this node, just to showcase it real quick, we go from 53,000 to 40,000. So it's the difference in about 14,000 life, just to give you an idea of how strong this node is for scaling life. It, of course, doesn't mean you can't scale a good life character without it. After this league, you'll still be able to make good life characters. It's just the reason we can hit a new maximum. Point number two for why life scaling is stronger than ever before, it's Adorned. In my opinion, this is the strongest jewel in the game, and it's the new meta for basically every build. I think there's very few builds where you don't optimize for Adorned, and it's still the best way to do it. I think Adorned it's so good, it's hard not to justify this. The problem is, Adorned, you end up making a tree like this, where all you care about is going to as many jewel sockets as possible, which means you care about voices, which means your build is nigh unaffordable because these things are very rare. And if you're trying to put 4 of them in your build, well, do the math. If everybody needs 4 of these voices and there's only a few on the market, they're going to skyrocket it to the moon in price. But for example, for how strong these are, just to give you some context, this jewel right here is giving me 17% life and flat 52 strength. This is actually better than one of the previous best jewels you could do as an attribute stacker. If you know Emperor's Master, you would know this jewel normally goes upwards of 100 divines because it is that high in demand. It is usually one of your best in slot jewels for an attribute stacker, but Adorned jewels are so strong that they actually dwarf this thing, or they surpass it, I should say, in power. Now look at my character scaling. You'll notice I put this on. I do get about 15 flat strength, but in losing the life from the scaling, we actually lose over 1,000 life. So if you're going to ask yourself, would I rather have 15 strength or 1,000 flat life? The answer is I'd probably rather have the 1,000 flat life, and it's not even close. That's a huge difference. Hopefully that gives you an idea of how strong these magic jewels can be. This isn't perfectly optimized, but this is pretty close to the pinnacle, which is having at least one synth implicit along with a good suffix, along with like a good prefix. But that isn't even like a peak of it. It can get better if you have triple synth implicits along with a corruption implicit. For example, I'll give an example right here. This jewel's actually almost getting me curse immunity or 57% curse reduction. That's kind of crazy. This jewel right here is giving me 5% reservation on top of the fact it's already better than an Emperor's Mastery. The sky is the limit for Adorned, and that's the second reason life stacking has gone to the moon. Quite frankly, Adorned is crazy for most builds, but it gets really crazy when it comes to attribute stackers and other builds that want to scale some specific stat you can't really get anywhere else but jewels, if that is what you're looking for in your character. Now, hopefully that gives a good idea. What we're doing for this character is using a support called Sacrifice, and this is how we get our base damage. So when you're scaling a skill, you usually need to scale a few things. Cast speed, you need to scale percent damage scaling, you need to scale percent crit, you need to scale crit multi, you need to scale your your penetration, your basically lowering the enemy's resistances, making the enemies take more increased damage, stuff like that. But one of the main things is base damage. Sacrifice support gives us about 10% of our life pool, which is in translation about 5k base damage. On a skill like Reap, that 5k gets transformed into about 10k base. And then if you get the more damage per blood charge, if you do a Val Reap, you get about 180% more damage. It ends up being like 25k base damage or something this thing is hitting with thanks to this sacrifice support. It is massive damage. Now you'll see the base skill does about 1k to 1500, and so hopefully that gives you an idea of how much this base damage is we're adding from sacrifice. And then not only that, with life stacking Wrathpith, you get a bunch of percent damage and a bunch of percent crit. Now with this character, since we're doing sacrifice support on top of Wrathpith, you'll see every time I cast, we cast for a very large amount of our life pool. We are sustaining that with Eternal Youth. Eternal Youth gives recharge, which then zooms our life all the way to full. Recharge is a mechanic where it is always on unless you've taken damage. Now, with Dissolution, the damage is separated from your actual life pool. So recharge usually, technically should never turn off. There are some cases where some enemies can like turn off your recovery. For example, the Maven Laser, that is my go-to example. It turns off all sources of recovery. So if you stand in the Uber Maven Laser, that will turn off your recharge. But for the most part, it shouldn't ever turn off, which means we're sustaining our pool with this recharge. You'll notice on a recharge pool, we have about 30k per second, and that almost matches the amount of cast speed we need for this skill. That being said, we do end up using some other skills that end up sacrificing life elsewhere, and sometimes we'll end up spending our life lower. But the idea is with recharge, we can sustain the cost of the sacrifice and Wrathpith and the cost from sacrifice support here. Now, if I was optimizing for this setup, for the recharge setup and whatnot, I would take off, or if I wasn't optimizing for, when I originally crafted these items, I could have gone for T1 recharge rate, which with on these gear pieces would be 38 like our boots. But originally when I was going to stack these characters to the highest HP number, I wanted the affix open so I could craft all attributes, which I'm going to do on the gloves and the boots when we set up the highest HP number possible later on. All right. Hopefully that gives you a good idea of the scaling of this character. And on top of that, as a strength stacker, we of course have the AoE from the strength mod on the mace, which gives about 300% AoE at 5k strength. And we have percent damage from Iron Will, which gives us another healthy about 1000% damage. So that is the scaling of the character. Ultimately, you could optimize for more damage scaling if you put in more crit multi, dropped a little bit of strength, rechange the tree around a bit. But for the most part, this is what I would call a practical setup for a life stacker in how high you could stack the life. That being said, you can scale harder or higher, I think, damage-wise with Relic of the Pact. You're going to drop HP to do it, but that's some examples. Now, let's go ahead and get into a 5-mod Uber Cortex, see what we get for damage mods, and I'll give you a showcase of what this looks like in a map. This project was a lot of currency. Life stackers don't necessarily need to be this much. You could definitely go for like a settle 129 Adorned, I think is the 16% life breakpoint, and then like go for fracture jewels, don't go for synth implicits, and you can still make a pretty crazy build. But hopefully this gives you an idea of what the pinnacle or the peak of life stacking could be in terms of Omega investment. All right, now as for the map mods, we got ourselves monster damage, monster proj, fizz reduction, accuracy, and less curse effect. So this means our despair doesn't really hurt their res as much. This means they have fizz reduction for whatever damage we were dealing that was base fizz from Reap. It shouldn't hurt our damage too much because most of our damage is chaos. And then they're really dangerous because they have 4 proj and 56% monster damage. One of the monsters in this map, his having extra proj makes it like a very dangerous attack. So we'll see how this goes, and I'll try to do it deathless, but I make no promises. As for map clear and making this build super fast, the high end is probably just doing a Mage Blood, getting all that extra onslaught, speed, and just zooming. Because you do have really good AoE, so this can be a crazy good clear character. As you can see, our Reap like covers the entire screen. But you don't have to do Reap. You can do other skills, whatever skill you want, pretty much, as long as it can work with Sacrifice. If you don't do a Sacrifice skill, then you have to do more gem level scaling. You can still get good damage, but it's not going to be quite as good as Sacrifice is here. All right, let's go ahead and get in this zone right here. With a Mage Blood, you're going to drop to about 49,000 life. That's about how much life I had before I swapped in this belt here. And that's okay. That should still be a pretty strong setup. Now let's go ahead and see how we do on these bosses. We're going to want to Despair, and we're going to want to do our Val Reap in order to get our damage scaling, you'll notice there when we have Valkyrie up, we have those blood charges, we hit like a truck and just kind of shred. Even though these are really high HP bosses, they have less curse effect, they have the fizz reduction, it wasn't really a problem for us. We were still able to melt them pretty good. Now, as for our character's tankiness, we can be quite tanky. We can take a hit or two. We have 50,000 life. Even though we don't have other damage mitigation layers, we can take a really hard hit because we are 10x the HP of a normal life-based character. That being said, the disadvantage with Dissolution, and I will always say this is the disadvantage, is it's not good at a lot of small hits. Stuff that tears you down over time. Stuff like Juiced Mapping, Simulacrum, where there's just a bunch of small enemies. They keep hitting you randomly because Dissolution requires a 2-second window in order for you to get your in order for you to have your life unreserved. Because the way Dissolution works is the damage you take, your life is reserved. Now we're about to get the guy that shoots extra proj, and he might just one-shot us because he has a crazy dangerous attack. We'll see how this goes. Definitely gonna want to prioritize getting him down if we can. His proj attack is crazy dangerous. I just prioritized getting him dead because he was I guess I killed the other guy too, so we're fine. But anyways, his proj attack is like super dangerous, so I was trying to prioritize getting him dead first. Even though these guys have decently dangerous mods, I'll tank this hit real quick here just to showcase. Okay, well, I didn't mean to tank the balls too. That was kind of that is not something I meant to do. I just wanted to showcase tanking the 2 seconds. See? All we need is that 2-second window of not taking damage, and then we're fine. Completely fine. Okay, this guy's gonna slam, and then we can finish him off. All right. So, hopefully that gives you an idea of the fact the build can tank a lot of damage just because it has 50,000 life. Doesn't have the sustain, like you can take a hit and you don't instantly regenerate. You have to go a 2-second window without taking damage. But for the most part, you're gonna feel tanky in most circumstances. Basically just scenarios where you're taking small hit, small hit, small hit. That is when you're gonna really be in some level of danger. Now, looks like we got the gloves. Okay, that makes sense. Gloves are max frenzy. Nice. I don't know what that's worth. I'm assuming that's worth something. A shield max frenzy, I feel like that would be valuable. Maybe it has to be on an int base. I don't know, but that's pretty good. I don't usually get good drops from Uber or Cortex, but this time we actually got paid, which that's pretty cool. Anyways, this is the setup that I say is practical for the build. I'm going to import this POB, have it in the description of the video, but I will also now cut to a setup where we just push the life number to the absolute limit, and we'll cut to that now. Following up from earlier, now we have a big life setup. Now, we have what has to be probably the absolute max HP you can get here, 69,420. I couldn't possibly in any way have made this number go higher. I think this is actually the actual limit of HP scaling. And the way we did that was essentially, we put on Untouched Soul. We made every socket on our thing empty and red. So this thing right here is giving, well, technically if I qualityed it a little bit better with Tainted Catalyst, it could be 48 life per red socket. So if you count them up, that's a roughly about 10, 16, 19, 22 red sockets. This thing right here is giving like close to 1,000 plus HP and 6% strength. It's very hard to beat this in terms of HP scaling. If you're min-maxing, I don't believe it can be beaten. But that being said, there can be things that are close behind it that don't require you to completely neuter your ability to have skill gems. For example, the Strike Stack Amulet. This amulet could have a T1 life, which would be another 170 flat life on top of it. Let's just compare. How much life do we lose when we put this on? We lose about 7,000, a little bit less than 7,000. If this had a T1 life roll, it would give us another roughly about 1,800 flat life, which would put us closer to the 64,000 life range. All in all, the point I'm trying to make here is Untouched Soul can get you a crazy life number, but you break your build to do it. The only build I really think that gets away with this amulet is Relic of the Pact. Maybe Burning Arrow gets away with it somewhat, but if you're optimizing your build, I think Burning Arrow might require too many sockets, where if you get a good amulet, like something like a Simplex, which of course is an insane investment, and Untouched Soul is like, you know, a 5C amulet, right? It's not expensive. So obviously the comparison isn't a very fair comparison, but the idea is this amulet, if you're actually trying to make a build that isn't Relic of the Pact or isn't Burning Arrow or whatever, will still scale a lot of life, and you can actually have gems in your sockets. Now, outside of that, the other thing we did to min-max this POB or this character was we swapped to a Quiver here. Quiver for HP scaling and strength stacking is I think probably the best in slot. That being said, Marcus, if you have heard of his name, he often does a lot of theory crafting for MP's big min-max projects where they min-max into one stat or whatever. He did a theory craft POB where he got a character up to 86,000 life. Now, the funny context here is he tested both a quiver and a like perfect shield, perfect synth implicit, perfect affixes, very painful to craft. He tested the two, compared them, and he found that the quiver wins without a corruption, but the shield wins if you corrupt 6% life on top of the perfect synth implicit. So it was a pretty close battle. My theory, just guessing on it, I was thinking ballpark quiver would be better. Quiver generally is going to be a lot easier to craft, but the shield, I guess, if you get a perfect corruption on it after crafting what would be astronomically painful to craft, you could beat it with a shield. Technically, I guess is the case. Now, that being said, why is Quiver good here? Well, you put on the Widow Hail, and all of a sudden, you get your synth implicits multiplied by 3.5, you get the affixes multiplied by 3.5, and what ends up happening here is you get like 17% strength, 28% life, almost 300 strength, 350 roughly life, and that's the stats you're getting from the Quiver. That's an insane amount of HP scaling there. As you can see, if I take this on and off, it is worth about 11,000 HP, right? Let's see how much the amulet's worth. Amulet's worth a little bit more with 1,000 flat, but they're not too far apart. And this amulet is requiring me to unequip literally every gem in my build, or every like gem socket, right? So that's a little bit crazy there. Outside of that, the other things we did to min-max this isn't 100% optimal. I was joking when I said 69,420 was the peak. We actually, oh, rest in peace, Budo's buggy. Hopefully you're okay. But anyway, 69,420 actually wasn't the peak. I had somebody else who was pushing HP, Epsy. He had a little bit better chest, a little bit better, I believe, boots, and a little bit better helmet than me for HP scaling. And if I had the tree optimized a bit more, we got to around 72,000 with actually stuff we crafted in game. The POB Marcus has with 86,000 requires basically 6% life corruptions on top of triple perfect synth implicits, on top of every gear piece crafted perfectly, on top of synth jewels crafted perfectly with correct corruptions. It's not easy to do. And on top of that, we would also need one passive voices basically to path around here and get a voices here. So I think realistically 72,000, 75,000 is about probably the peak we're going to see somebody get to in game, unless somebody just goes crazy and really wants to craft some insane jewels. So I was pretty happy yesterday on stream. We hit 72, I think 72.2 is what we ended up hitting. That was kind of the highest number. And then I fine-tuned it to try to get to 69,420 just because I think it's funny. Now, I wanted to try to get this character on PoE Ninja. Unfortunately, from testing it, I think there's something wrong with Untouched Soul in combination with Voices Jewels, where PoE Ninja just doesn't read the life number correctly. So on PoE Ninja, it reads me at 31,000 life, which is like the HP number if all my jewels were unequipped or something like that. So unfortunate there. I was hoping that if you sorted by life, you'd see 69,420. I thought it'd be funny, but I think in order to get to that life number, I'd have to maybe recraft the simplex with flat life instead of the 2% per strength, and I'd have to get the third voices here. Maybe if I really care about it at a later point, I'll try to set that up. But for right now, I don't think I'm really going to worry about it. Anyways, this is the life stacking project. I had a lot of fun doing this. I think optimally, you don't necessarily go with Untouched Souls. That way you can equip a lot of gem sockets. Like, for example, if I put this amulet on, I crafted this quiver for dot multi and strength and life and bow damage, then all of a sudden we could have a really probably decent burning arrow build. Or for example, with Wrath Pith, you can use any pretty much spell you want. Sacrifice gives you a lot of flat damage, or you can do non-sacrifice and then just try to force a little bit more gem levels than I did in my POB. So anyways, that is the idea of the life stacking project. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. As always, thanks for watching, Exiles. Take care and peace out.